This episode once again makes the point that I was making, that it's not like Babylon 5 doesn't know how to have big impacting moments. It just, I found it's done better. It's either more JMS's style or just more the style of the directors or something, when they don't try to be obvious about it. There's a great scene where Ivanova's giving her speech, and then Sheridan says, "Do you see it?" Delenn's like, "What?" And he says, "She's afraid. In all the years I've known Ivanova, I've never known her to be afraid." And we have only seen Ivanova afraid one other time, when, presumably, the Shadows were sweeping in the alternate timeline that I'm not going to get into right now. It makes sense, because the Shadows were vague. They were a sort of weird, we're not sure what they're doing, haunting from the shadows kind of a threat, right? Oh, God, we just need to come up with some way to fight them. Speaking tactically, Lord knows I'm not exactly tactically brilliant, as much as I absolutely adore tactics and enjoy tactical games, strategy, exercises, that kind of a thing. In my experience, there really are two types of tactical encounters. There's the kind where you're not sure what's going on, and the kind where you're absolutely sure what's going on. Now, I know that sounds weird, but what I mean by that is, in the former, is like 99% of tactical encounters are in the former. You don't actually know what's going on, you're not sure what you can do or how you can do it, right? That's that. But in that other 1%, if you know what's going on, if you have all the information available, there are really only two things you're staring at: victory or defeat. Because in my experience, if you know the full strength and breadth of your side and their side, you either know you're crushing them, or you know they're crushing you. And that, I think, in many ways makes the Vorlons more terrifying than the Shadows. They didn't know the full strength of the Shadows. Arguably still don't. Vagueness, rumors, fear-mongering, terrorism campaigns. The Vorlons have made a wall of ships and are slowly advancing in a line. No subtlety, no tactics, no strategy, no anything. We walk up, we blanket the signals, we destroy your planet, we move on. It is an unyielding juggernaut. When you are in the former situation, you can think, you can plan, you can decide, you can seek out information, you can hope. When you're in the latter situation, what the hell can you do? You know the strength of the enemy. You know their tactics, you know what they're doing, and you even can predict where they will be. It just doesn't matter. I have often said that one of the signs of a truly skilled tactician is to know when you have lost. And I've actually had people disagree with me on that, which I find hilarious personally. But there is something about looking at a situation and just saying, yeah, no, this is a loss. There's no clever tactics here. There's no special things. You understand the rules of engagement. You understand what you can do. You understand the enemy, you understand yourself. You have lost. What do you do about it? And I feel in many ways that's what's going on with the Vorlons. And Ivanova is certainly cognizant enough to be able to be capable, excuse me, I said that in the wrong direction, capable enough to be cognizant of that fact. And Lord knows Sheridan is. Also, I want you to imagine the mindset of just people in general. Right at the beginning, there's this great bit with just a random woman who's freaking out, and they do some good camera angle work, and they do some good things to try and show how people are just generally freaking the hell out. As well they should. As well individuals should, and governments should. The Vorlons have always been beyond us. I hate to reference Deathwalker again here, but in that episode, the Vorlons did something that would be a declaration of war if any other nation did it. Even one of the big league characters, like the Centauri or the Narn or the Human Alliance, or the Minbari, excuse me, I know I was missing one there. That is a declaration of war, what the Vorlons did. But everyone just kind of shrugged because it was the Vorlons. Everyone has always cowed and known that they're just bigger, they're just better. For anybody who's played Stellaris recently, the Vorlons are one of those bigger races. You just kind of let them do whatever, because, we can't do anything about them, right? And one of the reasons why that is because everyone, from down to the individual all the way up to the leaders of government, has always understood the Vorlons are just bigger than we are. They are the massive shark of doom in the large pond. And no matter what we are, whether we're a big fish or a little fish, we are nothing compared to them. And we've all known this. And that fear of that has always been there. Now the fear has been realized. All of the sudden, rather than this just being something that might come to be, something that we hope will never come to be, the Vorlons have outright just decided, no, we're just going to make a wall and we're just going to keep pushing it until everything in front of it is dead, and everything behind it is not. One massive wall of ships. Yeah. I actually don't think there's anything in real life that quite equates to that. I think the closest, and this is also going to fiction as well, would be imagine around Zefram Cochrane's era in Star Trek, okay? Humans have just discovered warp drive and are just unifying as a people. And then there's the Vulcans, who are way beyond them in every way. And then say one day the Vulcans decide, we've decided to just start wiping out life, including human life, and just start marching across the Earth, killing everything in their path. What the hell are we going to do about that? Also, I don't want to talk about the refugee situation. Lord knows refugees in general are actually an extremely gray, multifaceted, very complicated topic, and always have been. This is nothing new. I know there's refugee situations going on in real life when I'm recording this, but spoiler alert, that's been true for many, many, many years. Refugee situations are not new. So I don't really feel like I need to tiptoe around that subject. But what I want to ask you about is, what do you think's going on back at Earth right now? We don't get any insight into that, really, but Garibaldi has like one line, well, we can't go back to Earth because, you know, we broke from President Clark. You remember one of the big things the Clark administration was using to maintain its grip on power? I'll just remind you in case you didn't. It was, the aliens are against us. Anti-alien movement. Thanks, Vorlons. Thanks. Sheridan is continuing to build his legend in this one. I do find it interesting how much time and effort is spent on basically defeating a single Vorlon. First of all, before I go into that, though, there's a nice personal touch early on where he and Lorien are talking, and he just, like... I had a note here. I was like, I'm not sure if Sheridan is just building the legend or actually cares. And then the immediate following cutscene happened, and I'm like, okay, yeah, no, Sheridan cares. It's just Sheridan's mindset. Sheridan is what I call properly military. I admit some of this comes from the military backing in my own family, but I've always grown up with an idea that there's like the idealized concept of what a military should be, and then there's like the 50 other things that the militaries in the world throughout history have actually been. But the idealized idea, I could basically just describe by saying Sheridan. You know, there's a decency about it, there's a honor about it, there's a responsibility about it, and there's a sacred duty to civilians, to people in general. You are standing up and offering to lay down your life so others don't have to. And it is inherently built into the idealized military mindset to care about people in general and civilians especially. Doesn't matter whose, by the way, yours or theirs. And I like that about Sheridan. I respect that about Sheridan. And you see that in his conversation. I will try to save every damned one of them. One of the things I wonder is if Sheridan would have tried to negotiate with Ulkesh, if he thought he could, basically. Now, we don't have to be told this, but it's pretty clear that he's been working with Lita this entire time. And Lord knows she has been very anti-Ulkesh, basically since he showed up. They have not been quiet about that. So, the reason I bring this up is I have a very strong feeling that Sheridan had been counseled by Lita that, no, you can't negotiate with him. This is not Kosh. This is not someone you could discuss or have mutual ground with. This is someone who is an enemy who has to be removed. And as I think I've made clear, I agree with her assessment completely on that mark. And not just because of how he's treated her, but because of how he's treated everyone. Even in this episode, they reinforce that point. He easily defeats the squad and then sits there. Just lets them go. Because they don't matter any more than a bunch of nails in a box somewhere. Not even worth the effort to dispose of. So, they mentioned the life transference thing with regards to Sheridan, and we get the bombshell. He's only got 20 more years of life, and Delenn does not take that news well, nor do I blame her for that, knowing you have a ticking clock. And that's also an outlier. You know, that's the furthest extent. You could die before then. That's not exactly the best news to receive. But all of this kind of before I get into that, actually, let me one other thing. One of the things they did very intelligently was they spent considerable time building up just how strong the Shadows were. And it took considerable effort to defeat a Shadow ship under very unique circumstances, and considerable effort to defeat a Shadow ship under completely unique and different circumstances. And then they barely, with their best ship, managed to take out a Shadow fighter. They did proper escalation to emphasize the strength of the Shadows. Now, as I think I've mentioned before, Season 4 was rushed. So Season 4 is basically Season 4 and Season 5 condensed, right? Or what was intended to be Season 4 and Season 5 condensed. So I feel like this would have been built up more if time had been given, because it's already been demonstrated that they can do that. But the point is, the majority of this episode is defeating Ulkesh, who is not a Vorlon ship. He's a Vorlon. Further emphasizing the nature of the opponent. While the entire time we are getting increasing reports of just how many planets have been falling, and how refugee stations are slowly being evacuated because they themselves are now targets. Yeah, they do a really good job of emphasizing the Vorlon threat in this episode. This episode, I think, is probably at least a large part of why I say the Vorlons, personally, my opinion, are worse than the Shadows, because there's just something horrific. It's almost Borg-like, if you will. One of the things I've always loved about the presentation of the Borg when they're done properly is that dread. Not the horror, not the invincibility, not the having to technobabble or anything like that. The dread. For many years there, the words, the Borg, were terrifying to fan and viewer, and even the people in show. Just the mere concept. We might have seen a Borg attack. Might. Maybe. Would send people into just tension shock because of how much dread those words meant. Well, now, that's the Vorlons. They are just... So this episode also does some work on Garibaldi. Now, it's pretty obvious to us something's up with Garibaldi, because we have the third-person perspective. But even if it wasn't, something's pretty obvious that something's up with Garibaldi. In fact, even the even the characters have started noticing, hey, something's not right here. And I admit that because they do something weird. Normally, a work of fiction will go out of its way to try and convince you that someone isn't actually mind-controlled or isn't actually an alien possessee or, whatever, by trying to show it how it could be someone else, right? In this episode, they do something one step off of that. They show it to us from Garibaldi's perspective, and we can see his perspective and why he thinks his actions are rational. And yet, even ignoring the third-person stuff we know, we can still see that Garibaldi's logic is flawed. Para exemple. One of the things that Garibaldi brings up is, he comes back from frickin' dying and everyone's cool, but I come back and everyone's like, oh my god, oh my god. Well, there's a difference there, Mr. Garibaldi. Sheridan has been acting fine. You have not. Garibaldi himself is the cause of everyone's concern about him. Sheridan is still clearly and demonstrably acting like Sheridan. Garibaldi is not. And that's just one example. There's several nice touches about that throughout the course of the episode that really help to emphasize that something's just wrong here. And I like the fact that they show it to us from his perspective as well, so that we can see his mindset and why he doesn't fully get it. Now that's also important because this is Garibaldi. One of his most defining character traits has been his detective mindset, his ability to look at complex facts, and he is demonstrably no longer doing that. There are several points in this episode, at least 3 I can think of right off the top of my head, where Garibaldi should have been able to go like, oh, okay, and put 2 and 2 together and figure out what was going on and then just chill, but he doesn't. Garibaldi is no longer looking at complex facts, and if that alone is not information enough to tell you that something's wrong with him, I got nothing else. It's almost like something's messing with his mind. It's probably alien possession. That's pretty much the norm. It's like a rite of passage in science fiction. I also like one other thing, by the way. Garibaldi is clearly bothered by everything. But one of the things I like about it is Garibaldi is also clearly bothered by the fact that he's bothered by it. You know, that kind of self-looping frustration. I'm sure you know what I mean by that. I'm sure you've been through that just as I have in life. The idea of, okay, I've got to do this, but I can't because of this. Oh, it bothers me, I can't do this. Well, it bothers me. Well, it bothers me. Well, it bothers me. And it just loops, right? Right? That's what Garibaldi's going through right now, and God, I feel for him. Now, if I may go forward before we go talk about a couple other things for a second. First of all, I love that Sheridan's overall outmaneuvering of Volkesh is like almost textbook 102 military tactics. But I love that because that's so appropriate. The Vorlons don't do tactics. Remember, what is the tactic, and I'm using that term very loosely, of the Vorlon fleet? Move in and attack. A move, for those of you who know what I mean by that, is not a tactic. But that's what the Vorlons are doing. Because they are so convinced of their superiority, with good cause, that why would they need to bother with tactics? And so Sheridan successfully outmaneuvers him by applying tactics to the situation. And even then, it literally kills him to do it. Second time he's died, by the way. Now, that brings up one other thing. I thought the overall defeat of Ulkesh, Kosh dragging him out to the ship destroying, I thought that was good. Overall good. I only have one complaint, and it's a weird nitpick, because the amount of time it takes them to crack the shell is too long. Now, don't mistake me. I get the point. The idea was that with all this energy and all these shots, it would take a long time to crack the shell. But from a directorial perspective, from a fictional piece of work, you should have kind of fast-forwarded through a little bit of that so that it cracks the shell. Because the scene basically starts to drag. It's like, all right, yep, they're still shooting, yep, still lightning, still shooting, still lightning, still shooting. It's the same exact reason why they got rid of the second run for the Luke's bombing run. Really, guys? Sorry. Nothing I can do about it. We live near an emergency dispatch area, for those of you who don't know where. It's the same reason they got rid of Luke's second run on the Death Star trench. They had to, because for pacing-wise, it just dragged everything on. Even though that logically makes sense, and in every way fits with the overall theme of what they're doing, aka it's such an impossible shot that it would take Luke 2 tries and the Force to pull it off, from a fictional directorial perspective, it drags. And it's the same thing with this. It's just like, all right, come on, I get it. He's got very strong armor. Let's go. You know, you don't have to reemphasize that hard, because after a while it just gets repetitive. So then Morden comes down. Now, what I find really weird is Morden flat out lies to Londo and Cartesia. Now, what I find weird about that is I can't decide if he believes that lie or not. He actually says flat out, the Vorlons don't want civilian deaths. The Vorlons have been killing literally millions of civilians. Don't think they care. But the reason I ask if he actually believes that lie or not, especially in his more deranged state, is why would he tell that lie? What benefit is there to try and throw some Centauri ships at the Vorlon fleet? They're not going to do anything. Why is it so important to keep the shadow ships here, knowing they're coming for that matter? I don't actually understand what the purpose is of this attempted deception. What do the shadows gain from it, in other words? Maybe there's just something I'm not thinking about. I don't know. Wouldn't be the first time. And then, of course, we see Cartagia. Now, I mentioned before he wasn't actually acting that mad. Not really. I like how each concurrent episode is basically showing him going more and more, because there's this great thing where he basically talks about the funeral pyre that will light the way towards his apotheosis, ascent to godhood. I mean, I could deconstruct that, but I don't think I need to, because I think it's blatantly obvious just how that showcases his mindset. But then a couple interesting things happen. First of all, Londo reaches out to B5, first time doing so, and he does so to verify something he already suspects. Are they coming? How much time do we have? Note Sheridan at first is like, ugh. But then Sheridan, who is a very good reader of people, notices something that I've been noticing the last few episodes. Because even on the VidCom, Londo has dropped all pretense. That is the real Londo talking to Sheridan. Sheridan notices that. And Sheridan also starts treating Londo seriously, almost like an ally, actually. Because if you'll notice, Sheridan treats people based on categories. You know, there's friends, there's allies, there's civilians, and there's enemies, and there might be a couple others, but those are the main blocks. So he shifts from treating Londo like a civilian, which is how he has usually approached him, or an enemy, which is he approached him in the past. He starts treating him like an ally. It's a subtle touch, but it's there. And Londo's response, I owe you a favor. And good luck. You're going to need it. Because Londo knows there's nothing he can do about that Vorlon fleet. He is, in many ways, relying on Sheridan and his people to succeed. And he is doing everything he can to make sure that the back end, as far as the Centauri and the Narn, are dealt with. This is, of course, assuming Londo's going to keep his deal with G'Kar. It is possible he won't. There is nothing binding him to that. So then there's a brilliant scene. Londo this whole time, for the last 4 episodes now, has dropped the mask. And has been just absolutely acting the hell out of every scene. Peter Jurassic has been just nailing every scene he's in. Then he walks up to Cartagia. Oh yeah, just in case nobody... Someone will mention it if I don't. The scene with the heads, that was actually Andreas Katsoulas' head, which is right by Peter Jurassic, so I just thought I'd bring that up, because it's a fun little point. So, no. Later on, Londo is like, we need to go to Narn. And he brilliantly outmaneuvers Cartagia. That scene, right there... That is why Londo is so damned dangerous politically. He knows how to observe his enemy, how to carefully plan his method of attack, and how to perfectly execute it. He completely outmaneuvers Cartagia. Cartagia even starts the meeting upset at him. Starts the meeting in that, I might chop your head off because it amuses me kind of mood. And Londo swims him, ballets him over to his side and to do exactly what he wants to do. And the entire time Cartagia is convinced that this is what is best for Cartagia. Brilliant scene. Oh, and of course, there's a lot of doublespeak there. Londo says a lot of things that are true in that scene, saying them in a way that is absolutely false. Mask firmly back on. It's a brilliant scene. I love it. Sadly, of course, then Londo does not suggest something as punishment for G'Kar. He does, to phrase this a different way, for those of you paying attention, Londo decides not to save the eye that doesn't see. Yeah. After all, the eye does not see the greatness of Cartagia. I don't know what Londo could have suggested, but I think he should have suggested something. Because if he had... well, it would have been the same general thing he's been going through, having to endure pretending to be one of these sadistically evil people for the betterment of both of their people. He should have been like, oh, you should cut up a rune in his chest or something, like, make a scar or something, or maybe you should put on blinders on him so he can't see where he's going, watch him stumble about, something like that. Something cruel, but not ripping out his damn eye. And that way, it would have been less bad than it could have been. It is a unique form of cruelty, forcing someone who is good to perform an evil act in order to prevent a worse act from happening. The only difference here is that Cartage is not doing that on purpose, because he doesn't realize Londo is actually not sadistically, horrifically cruel. Whether he is good or not is far more debatable, but he is without question not like the rest of the Centauri upper echelons. Towards the end of this, right before the scene I just mentioned, actually, there's a scene between Delenn, Sheridan, and Lorien. Now, what I like about this scene is this is another example of Sheridan character building, and this will be important for the rest of this season. Sheridan is honest. That's actually another thing. It goes back to that idealized military concept. You're honest. If you don't like someone, you walk up to their face and say, hey, I don't like you, and here's why. I mentioned way back in Gropos, I believe, there's this Marine guy who, a ground pounder who walks up, a grunt, who walks up to a flyboy and is like, hey, you're going to do something about the flyboy? Says, well, yeah, I'd love to, but I'd have to get a stool to get up to your face. And the guy likes him for it. That's very military, idealized military. You're honest. You're upfront about it. You don't try to lie. You don't try to be like, whatever. You don't stand down. You stand up and you own up to it. And so Sheridan has that mentality in spades. So he, at no point in time does it even occur to him to do to Delenn what Delenn already did to him. Delenn flat out admitted, in her grief and guilt, by the way, that she kept news of Anna Sheridan from Sheridan. Now, she had her reasons for doing that, but she wasn't honest with him. Now, I don't think he is honest with her as some kind of take that, or this is how I think, or whatever. I think it's just him being him. Because he is a bluntly, overtly, blatantly honest kind of individual. He always has been this whole time. So he just walks up and is like, yeah, so I'm going to die in 20 years? That may not have been the correct thing to do. I don't know. I'm not the imperial judge who can make such a statement. That's a very difficult thing to lay on someone, and it has been argued many times in real life and in fiction that sometimes truth is sufficiently terrible that it doesn't need to be shared. But Sheridan doesn't think that way. Sheridan just says, hey, here's the truth. Drops it on her. Bam. And then, still being Sheridan, just says, hey, so I want to marry you. Now, I found that very interesting because that's the first scene where the two actors have been in the same room and there has been genuinely good chemistry between them, in my opinion. And it's at least partially because he is semi-awkward about it. He's not cocksure or full of himself. He's not posturing. He's just, I don't know. I mean, this is the ring, and it's not quite the one I want, but it's this... And it's this sort of fumbling honesty about the way he approaches it. And she, of course, doesn't know what an engagement ring is, so he has to literally explain to her what he's doing to her as he's, as he's putting the ring on her finger, like, so this is something for marriage, and she does... God, that doesn't fit that finger at all. And she does mention, she does have a reaction to the word marriage, so she does know what a marriage actually means. It's a good scene. I guess we'll have to see where things go. But before we leave, I have a weird question for you. Just odd one. If you had someone very important to you, friend, family member, loved one, doesn't matter, someone who's very important to you, and preferably you are very important to them as well, would you want to know? Given the choice, would you want to know that, hey, by the way, they're going to die in 20 years? Guaranteed. That's the outlier. That's the furthest out. Between now and 20 years from now, would you want to know? No right, no wrong answer here. I'm just curious. I'll see you guys next week.